Okay, if you watched the previous video, then you would have seen us using the Monosequencer to sort of emulate this idea of linear drumming. So linear drumming comes from primarily kind of like funk musicians and so on, people like Dave Garibaldi, Sly and the Family Stone, Tower of Power. This is the pattern that we had when we finished last time. Great. Now, one of the ideas that we're going to explore here is using some of the other parts of the Monosequencer and what kind of advantages they might give us. Because this isn't really a multi-sampled kick, ideas such as velocity are not really going to help us in this instance. And because they're drums, duration isn't really sort of applicable. We could use octave, but as you would have seen from the previous one, because this is really just a drum rack that covers one set of grids that only covers pretty much 2 octaves. The octave switching isn't really going to give us any real sort of significant advantage. We also saw that we could adapt the pulse, and that gave us an interesting kind of sort of dynamic changes to our drum pattern. So this sort of advantage isn't really available to us in the normal kind of MIDI editing windows of our DAWs. And the only way that we could achieve that is by using a method like this, or actually reprogramming it, which may or may not be straightforward depending on what kinds of patterns we're doing. Now, one area that we can actually use the Monosequencer for is the repeat. In modular synth terms, this is sometimes known as a ratchet, which means that the note itself, or the step, is repeated a number of times, and it gives you this kind of what's known as ratcheting. Let's try one of the snare drums. Should we try the snare drum? So that's here on step 5. So step 5 here, we'll just do 1 ratchet. So you can go all the way up to 16 ratchets. So let's try 1 ratchet. 3 ratchets. Let's put it on the hi-hat. Now the ratchets give you this very much a burst, you know, it's one of those sorts of burst ideas. Now the problem about it is that we are sort of hearing it in the same place at the same time all the time. One of the things that can be done, especially if you've seen some of my other videos on the Monosequencer, is actually each of these parameters, pitch, velocity, octave, duration and repeat, actually have their own sort of set of parameters in terms of the length, duration and so on. So here, if we change the step length from 16 to 15, this means that for the repeat parameter, this will cycle around and sort of keep moving. So let's just try this. So we're going to do 1 ratchet on beat 1. So we can hear it moving all the time. Now that's one way of kind of sort of dealing with the monotony of hearing the same thing sort of happening all the time. So that's one method. One other thing that we can also do if you wanted to sort of spice up your drum patterns, and I'm going to do that down here, which is basically the gate. So the gate basically turns the step on. So if we didn't want to hear the kick drum on beat 1, we take it off here. Because I've limited this down to 8, it's going to both do beat 1 of the bar, and it's also going to do beat 3 as well. And if we didn't want that, then we could move it to 16th notes and have it so that it will be in the middle. Now, one of the interesting things about this is that you could, you know, if you wanted to keep your kick and snare sitting on separate channels. So you could use this to change or vary your sort of percussion parts. So here we've got 8 steps, and let's say that we program it so that there are some spaces. Now that's a good way of kind of programming in some variations, because they're easily kind of put back in. You just click them back in and off you go. So I think you get the idea. Now, one of the other things that we can do here, just much like we did with the ratchets or the repeats, is that we can actually make the gate pattern a number of cycles shorter or longer than the main pattern itself. So here I'm going to make this 7. At the moment there's no difference between 7 and 8. Until of course we put a space in there. So let's put a space in here. So it's really noticeable when the space, say, occurs on something like one of the kick drums, because all of a sudden it creates quite a dramatic variation. When this happens, say, on the snare drum or especially on the hi-hats, we tend not to hear it as much. Because this is basically this linear drum method, because this linear drum method is a monophonic type approach, it's not too drastic when we sort of drop one of the gates here so that the step isn't activated, because there's only ever really going to be one drum voice playing at any one point. Okay, until next time. If you like what you've seen and what you've heard, please remember to like and subscribe, and see you next time.